My grandmother never sought out the company of a cat, but she never lacked for it either. Doodles the stray came around her back door a year or so before I was born, and Gran left out milk for him for 2 days, and when he came back a third, she went out and bought him a bag of cat food, and that was that. He moved in for the next 13 years. Priscilla came within a week of me being born. Gran found her as a kitten under a dumpster outside the commissary, put her in her brown Buick station wagon where the cat took a terror shit halfway home on the I-8. Gran ended up selling the car soon after, claiming she could never get the smell out of the air conditioner, but the moment I came home from the hospital, Priscilla climbed up on my little baby chest and touched noses with me like we were on a goddamn Purina commercial. And in doing so, cemented her place in the family for 19 years until she died under a bush of old age. After Doodles finally passed, Gran swore she would never get another cat again. But within a month, Tupeli, a little stray Siamese, showed up, ate peanuts out of her hand, and stayed for 6 years until she got hit by a car. Then a week later, Missy, this fat white jerk of a cat who wouldn't let anyone pet her but my grandmother, showed up like she'd seen a vacancy sign light up. And the story goes. And it wasn't just Gran's cats either. Possums moved in under the old wood deck, got their own dish of cat crackers. Hummingbirds got their feeders. Raccoons and neighbor cats who just wanted to sponge off the spoiled little friend next door found a little extra kibble on the side. And since more than half of my childhood was spent either growing up in that house or coming back to it after school, I'd come to understand nature as a pack of adorable hobos that could leave invisible signs about where kind suckers lived and good eats could be got. And Gran embraced her role as ambassador to the suburban animal kingdom, decorating her house exclusively with totems, like, for instance, a 30-pound porcelain cat statue, cat wind chimes, black cast iron cat silhouettes whose purpose was a fucking mystery to me, and cat nutcrackers and tree topper for the holidays, all standing guard at various positions throughout the house. Paganism, suburban style. Now, all a kid knows growing up around a person is their nature, right, until they're informed otherwise. And so it wasn't until I turned 18 and was about to move away for college that Gran decided to tell me about the role experience played in making her a cat lady. She started by saying, you know, if you hadn't come around when you did, I don't know if I would have decided to keep on living. And then she decided to go on and talk about the dream she'd had as a child of breaking into showbiz, which would have been plenty hard enough if she hadn't grown up female and in 1920s rural poverty in Arkansas. So instead, it was the life of a Navy wife for her. From 18 on, moving around the world from place to place for 20 years with 2 kids in tow until she finally put her foot down, said no more, and rooted herself in a ranch-style house in Del Cerro. Just in time for her children. Del Cerro? Yeah. The hill crest of tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. And she did it just in time for her 2 kids to fly the coop. And all that she devoted her life to caring for seemed suddenly and hopelessly concluded until me and 3 generations of cats showed up to fill it back up. The comfort and peace of a place that could lead even a wild animal to discover domesticity was a privilege I craved even while I had it. But ours was not a family to talk about their feelings much, so the way I tried to say it, using the accepted language we shared, was by negotiating a promise out of her that she'd never sell the house or otherwise let it slip out of the family. I told her how I wanted to raise my children within its post-war plaster walls one day, and with their support impart the expectation of being protected by constant watchful cohabitors, both furry and family. She countered, though, by trying to make me promise that if something happened to her, I would not come running back. A home, once family has passed, is just a house, one whose memories become burdens if a person allows nostalgia to poison them. Better to move on and always forward. we parted ways, agreeing to disagree. Something did happen to her, of course, because that is the fate of grandparents. While I was on the other side of the country, she was diagnosed with lung cancer without ever having smoked a cigarette in her life. Fought it for a year, then broke her hip in a fall. Firemen carrying her out across the threshold like a bride in reverse was all that a matriarch of lower-class means received by way of ceremony. And she died a month later without ever returning to her house, waiting just long enough for me to come home and have one last Christmas with her in hospice. She hated funerals, so we never had one. Her last cat, Missy the asshole, she lingered on for another 4 years before she got killed by a neighbor dog that had slipped the leash, and then that was that. The animals vanished. 10 years I stayed away until I came home for what I swore was 1 year tops, just long enough to help Mom figure out what to do with the place. But that was before I saw with my own eyes the speed of decay. How easily plants can brown and dust will settle and death can paint itself over every texture. We'd never known religion, but I'd come by belief in this place, and it had become a mockery of my memories. The only clear solution was home renovation, which I acknowledge now is a loaded phrase under the circumstances. So I moved in just to make the commitment more unavoidable. And then I spent over $2,000 on tools that I had little comprehension of using. Sledgehammers to swing into the rotted out deck, pickaxes to uproot the beetle-eaten trees, dirt and compost, and every variety of shit known to man or animal. Plants that could survive droughts of water and attention from a madman who'd taken to ping exclusively in the backyard in the belief he could will it back to life. Bringing in help would have yielded a more professional result, but there is something foul about subcontracting out the sacred. So instead, I enrolled at YouTube University because a point would be proven. A thing that is good can survive in this world. Mine was a mania, never maintained for so long before or since, the kind that only loss, obsession, and denial can conjure. It was as much performance art as workmanship. With my grandmother's warning about the dangers of nostalgia replaying constantly, I purged everything that reeked of this stuff in a giant mound in the driveway to be hauled away, because the dead demand burial, and the act of building a funeral pyre is too dangerous to go about with delicacy if a person does not want to burn with it. My mom couldn't help hoarding more objects than she allowed me to throw out, everything from my grandmother's glass clowns, think about that, to a bag of hair she'd kept as a souvenir of surviving chemo. Kitschy, ironic treasures, some, but also relics that were as much of my grandmother as her bones. They all had to go except for the cat totems. I couldn't bear to add them to the heap, so I placed them tactfully among the plants and bushes in the backyard as little secrets that only I could know about, hoping they would serve as signs that the animals could come and read, "We're back in business. Come, mooch off me. SOS, motherfuckers." Meanwhile, the house needed to have some functional purpose to pay for all this work, so I brought in tenants to help supplement the cost. They were friends, some, passing acquaintances, others, strays, all, reeling from heartbreaks or small bank accounts or otherwise hard up. And that's when the ghosts came out. First, there were sightings in the backyard shared by the midnight maudlin smokers of liquid shadows moving just outside the throw of the one working light. And then it was a startled report of a tenant who had just moved in of hearing a cat crying out somewhere among the house's still bare walls but never to be found. And then next came a couch surfer's lucid dream about petting a white, fluffy cat on her chest, who still felt her weight upon her when she woke to notice her hand passing through the space where she had been. All were positively spooked about the stories they swapped, except for me. I chose to interpret the sightings as an indication that I'd been right all along. I needed the cats to come back. Their benediction would be my benchmark for knowing I had finished the job I'd set out to accomplish, that something had been preserved. I'd saved the house. Except it was full of strangers. And the question of what that was all worth, what was going to come next, was the only thing I could hear when I stayed up late and alone there. So I started ending my nights at a bar instead. This very bar, in fact. Where the closest thing to a functioning family can be found. God save the whistle stop. And when I did eventually leave this bar, long after closing hours, I'd often choose to sneak back home into my mom's house and pass out in my childhood bed there without waking her, just to avoid seeing the evidence that Gran might have been right all along. I'd just rebuilt a house, but not a home. And it was on one of those rare nights that I wasn't in the bar that a shaggy calico swaggered in here, just like any other regular will, flirted with my friend Craig until he took her home. Typical Craig. Where she commenced beating up his other two cats. And so he offered her up as a birthday present to me, and I accepted. And from the minute I brought her home, and I named her Lana after a popular hot mess, she went right to work, exploring and memorizing every inch of the house and backyard like a fat Roomba. And after she got chased up on the roof by a neighbor dog and I needed to go get a ladder to get her down, she decided that the property line was space enough. She never left the borders again. She staked her claim. She marked whatever weird little hobo signs animals leave. And the raccoons and the coyotes and the birds and the possums and my new roommate's dog, Charlita, and I don't even know whose fucking cat this is, who was on my couch last week. Haven't stopped coming since. The space has been reclaimed. A place where a person can love something, turns out, is worth fighting for. Having a door and the will to keep it open for whatever might come looking for warmth is as good a reason to live as any I've found yet. And God damn it, if it was good enough for Gran, good enough for me. Thank you all.